In this video, I'm going to answer the question of whether or not I think the Nikon D7200 is still a good camera in 2019. So I have had the D7200 for around about a year now, and it's gone very quickly. And all in all, I'm a really big fan of this camera. I think it's a fantastic camera for landscape photography. So there's going to be a lot of positivity towards the D7200 in this video. So do be warned. In saying that, there's one or two things that I wish I could change about it. Very small, minor things, but you know, I still would like to mention them in this video. Now, before we get into the meat of this video, I'd like to mention two very important things actually. Firstly, I'm a landscape photographer. I don't shoot weddings or product photography or any sort of portraiture at all, purely just landscape. So please bear that in mind throughout this video. You know, there's a lot of things, a lot of features within the D7200 that I don't really use because they're of no benefit to me as a landscape photographer. Secondly, and this is so important, if there's one thing that you take from this video, guys, please let it be this. The Nikon D7200, as wonderful as it is, and like every single camera on this planet, is a tool. I am the photographer, I am the creator of all the images I make. The D7200 might give me better image quality than my previous camera. It might make the job easier, quicker, or perhaps more enjoyable. But this camera, and every single camera in the world, it's not going to guarantee you better photographs. The photographs come from your know-how of the art of composition, of light, and everything that comes with that. And secondly, I think your willingness to be in the right places at the right times. That's how you get good photographs. This thing just makes things more enjoyable and easier along the way. So please bear that in mind. So this week, we are in, again, the incredible Snowdonia National Park in North Wales, one of my favourite places. Epic landscapes. I'm in a brand new location today, so really excited. We've got the Nikon D7200. We've got an array of lenses that are perfect for landscape photography. So let's go and have some fun.
Tonight, but you don't seem to forget about yourself. Wondering how it could go so wrong, but you didn't call for help. But let me tell you about the trees and the seas, how it's all connected. The flowers and the birds and bees, the northern lights, yeah, we're all affected.
Okay, so as you can see, I've found what appears to be a pretty attractive tree here to use as a subject. And I just spotted it from walking up the main pathway, and I decided to come off and sort of venture around this area a little bit and see if I can work a composition here, see if we can use this as a bit of foreground element as a subject, and I think it's going to work. So what I'm going to do is get the camera out here, get the D7200 out, and pretty much just get set up in this area somewhere with my tripod. And like I say, try and figure out a composition and see if we can make it work. Right, so we are nicely set up, and this is looking like it's going to be quite a nice little photograph. I'm excited for it. Now, before I get into any photography, my current subscribers, I'm sure, will have noticed I finally got my new tripod, and I'm absolutely over the moon. It took probably the best part of 2 months, so I'm absolutely delighted to finally have it all up and running and, you know, out on the field. I've gone for the Manfrotto 055 CX Pro 4, I believe, and, you know, just this classic Manfrotto ball head. I'll put the product code up on the screen there. It's just letters and numbers, but it might mean something to somebody. But yeah, I'm really, really happy. I will talk about it a lot more in a future video. But yeah, this photograph, I'm quite happy with it. Like I mentioned, this tree is working really, really well as a foreground element. And like I mentioned, we've got the beautiful Snowdonia Mountains, or some of the Snowdonia Mountains there in the background. Absolutely gorgeous. It's quite an interesting shot regarding the Nikon D7200 here. One thing that I wanted to talk about in this video was how good the dynamic range is in this camera. And I'm taking one exposure here, ISO 100, f5.6, and my shutter speed is 1/160th of a second. And I'm able to do that in one exposure. I'm just going to put the histogram up here somewhere of what it's showing on the back of my camera now. And you can see I'm completely stretching out that histogram, but I'm not quite clipping the highlights or the shadows, which is amazing. And I've got a graduated neutral density filter on the front here, but it's only one stop. It's only stopping one stop of light from the sky there. So we've still got a huge dynamic range from the sky down into the foreground. This foreground's really dark down here, trust me. So the camera is really standing up to that test. Incredible dynamic range here on the Nikon D7200. It really is. It's something that I used the Nikon D3100 before this, and it's been a huge jump for me. Often I'm able to take just one exposure in these sort of testing dynamic range landscapes, if you will. So yeah, really happy with this. So you've heard the settings already. Pretty simple composition. I'm using the tree on the left hand side of the image, and I've got the mountains and a few of these cliffs here on the right hand side of the frame to sort of balance it all out. Trees are a fantastic subject. We've got a beautiful moody sky off there in the background. It's telling a really good story this time of year, I think, in Snowdonia. It's the wettest month of the year. You know, there's no leaves on the tree. It shows what season we're in. Absolutely amazing. Really bland landscape, and I'm loving it. So hopefully that comes out as a nice image. I'll show you that one now, guys, and we'll crack on with this little adventure. Okay, so I really hope you like that photograph, and as we carry on with this adventure, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Nikon D7200. In fact, I wanted to run through a few sort of pros and cons that I have personally with the D7200. Now, it's worth mentioning that anything that I do find negative about this camera, they're not a massive deal, and obviously they weren't a deal breaker for me when it came to buying the camera. However, I think it's worth mentioning them because it might be a deal breaker for somebody else. So let's carry on with this adventure and let's discuss some of my pros and cons with the Nikon D7200. Right, so my first positive of the Nikon D7200, and it's something that I've actually previously mentioned, and it's got an incredibly high dynamic range, which in my opinion is a pretty important trait in a camera for a landscape photographer. The last image we took was a really good example of how you could really stretch out that histogram with the Nikon D7200. Now, your dynamic range is essentially the difference between the darkest and the lightest tones of your image. So we're talking about shadows versus highlights, and your whites versus your blacks as well. So it's really good to have a camera that can give you the best opportunity to capture a shot in one exposure, you know, before you have to think about using ND grad filters or even bracketing or anything like that. So that's my first positive about the Nikon D7200. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a bit of a beautiful vantage point up here. We're nearly at the top of this hill. You can hopefully see behind us, but let's talk about the first negative that I have with the Nikon D7200. And that is the fact that it doesn't have a live histogram. And please remember, this is something that's not a massive deal to me, but it would be really nice, I think, to have on the camera. I have it on this Canon G9X vlogging camera, which is wonderful, and it's really nice to be able to frame up an image and know that your histogram is going to be correctly balanced before you get the photograph. Whereas with the D7200, I have to take the photograph and then check if the histogram is balanced or not. Again, it's not a massive deal, but that's my first negative, my first con with the Nikon D7200. All right, so we are running out of daylight a little bit, but I'm going to crack on, and we've got my second positive with the Nikon D7200, and this one's really simple. It's all about the processing power of the camera itself. Now, I may have mentioned earlier that I previously used the Nikon D3100, which is obviously an entry-level DSLR. Now, D3100 has Nikon's X-Speed 2 processing power, whereas the D7200 has Nikon's X-Speed 4 processing power. And I do a lot of long exposure photography, and I do remember using the D3100. If I ever took an exposure of anything over 30 seconds, I used to have to stand and wait for the camera to process the image just to show it to me there on the back of the camera on the LCD screen. Whereas now, with the D7200, I take the long exposure shot and it shows me it on the back of the LCD pretty much instantly. So that's my second positive of the Nikon D7200. Okay, so the second thing that I don't really like about the D7200, I think it's something that it's really missing, and this is quite a simple one. It doesn't have an articulating screen and an articulating LCD screen on the back. Now, I'm a sort of landscape photographer that really loves to use his live view to frame his compositions. I love using it to zoom in on a subject where I can manually focus and make sure everything's really, really sharp. Now, it's not a massive deal, but now I've got a tripod that can get literally 9 centimeters from the ground. I think it might be something that I'll start noticing a bit more. You know, it's going to be really hard to be able to frame my composition when my camera's right down here and I'm unable to sort of tilt my screen up to make it easier for me to frame my composition. Again, not a massive deal, but it's just something that I wish the D7200 did have. So that leads me on to my third and final positive of the Nikon D7200. And obviously I have more than 3 positives of the camera itself. However, I'm just keeping it down to 3 for the purpose of this week's video. And this one's perhaps the most important thing that I look for in a camera, and that is image quality. The image quality on the D7200 is fantastic. And obviously, I've mentioned earlier that I jumped up from the Nikon D3100, which is an entry-level DSLR, so of course I'm going to see a little bit of an increase in image quality. But for the purpose of what I use my images for, which is showing them on this YouTube channel and Instagram, the image quality is more than good enough for what I need. You know, I don't print images at this stage. I don't even have a website where I have a portfolio of larger resolution images or anything like that. So even the Nikon D3100 would have been fine at this stage. But yeah, fantastic image quality, and a lot of your image quality is actually down to your lenses. But if I use my 18 to 55mm lens on my D3100 and then on my D7200, the image quality is going to be slightly better on the D7200. And D7200 is a 24 megapixel camera, whereas the D3100 is a 14 megapixel camera. So obviously a really big jump for myself there, but yeah, more than happy with the image quality on the D7200. All right, so we're actually bypassing the hill that we were going to go to the top of there, but I can see from down here that it is pretty much completely shrouded in clouds, so I'm not even going to bother going up there because we're not going to see anything. I'm going to stay down here where we've already got beautiful views over the national park, hopefully try and get one more photograph. Now, before I do, I wanted to mention the third and final negative that I have with the Nikon D7200, and that's the video functions and the video quality of the camera itself. There's no 4K shooting. If you want to shoot at 60 frames per second, you need a 1.3 times crop. Even at 1080p, I don't think the video quality matches my Canon G9X that I'm filming on right now. It's got sluggish autofocus. It's just really not made for shooting video. And it's not a massive deal to me because I'm really comfortable with my Canon G9X that's filming now for shooting my vlogs. But it would be nice to have a stills camera at my disposal as well to shoot some video, especially because I've got a 55 to 200mm lens. It'd be great to get some nice telephoto shots across these beautiful landscapes as well. So yeah, not a massive deal for me, but it might be for other people. So that's the pros and cons of the D7200. And what I'm going to do now is just keep heading back down this hill and hopefully try and get one more photograph. guys, I'm set up for what is going to be, as you can see there, Nikon D7200. I'm going to take this photograph now. It's going to be my last image of the day. Don't know if you can see behind me there, but there's a lot of sort of low cloud rolling in over the hills this way, so looks like it might be rain. So I'm going to get this shot and then scurry on back down the mountain. But this is going to be a nice way to finish the day, I believe. I'm shooting this at ISO 100, f11, half a second, so really simple settings. I'm just going to press the shutter button there. Yeah, but compositionally we've got this beautiful lake in the foreground, and then a few more cliffs in the midground, and then we're looking back off into the beautiful Ogwen Valley there, which is just amazing. It's somewhere that I've spent a lot of time with my camera, and it's really nice to photograph it from this perspective for once, something a little bit different, you know. And then we've got these beautiful moody skies up there as well, which have really been a theme of the whole day. And again, just like my previous image, it's really nice to be able to capture them. And again, I've got a really nice balanced histogram, only taking one exposure, so it's showing the fantastic dynamic range of this camera once again, and another nice image. So I'll show you this one now, and then I'm going to get down off this mountain. Okay, so all in all, I think the Nikon D7200 is still a fantastic camera in 2019, and it's always been in my sort of foresight to eventually upgrade to full frame or even mirrorless full frame eventually, but until I need some vast increase in image quality at some stage in my life, I'll be sticking with the Nikon D7200. So with that being said, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it's helped you decide whether or not the D7200 is right for you, but remember, it's just a tool. You need to get out in these landscapes with any camera you've got and enjoy your landscape photography. So I shall see you guys on the next adventure next week, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Out!